The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hi everyone, I'd like to welcome you to today's webinar, Dynamics GP to Dynamics 365, Part 3. It's our last one of the series. We appreciate you taking the time out of your schedule to join us today. There are a couple of reminders before we get started. All attendees are in listen-only mode, so if you have questions, you could either unmute yourself and just ask those and create a conversation here, or you can put them in the question box and we will get to those throughout the presentation as well. So with that, I will introduce our speaker today, Jennifer Johnson, who is a solution architect here at Velocio. So with that, Jennifer, I will turn it over to you.
Hey, thank you. Can you guys hear me okay?
You are good.
Excellent. So good afternoon. Again, my name is Jennifer Johnson, and I am one of the solution architects with Velocio that works in the D365 for finance and operations space. My background, I've been with, Velocio, what was Socius, for almost 5 years now, working with Dynamics 365 or the Dynamics AX product. Prior to that, I spent many years as a purchasing and supply chain manager for a company that was engineer to order manufacturing, and we were on GP. We implemented GP financials, GP manufacturing, and then back in, I guess it was 2010, 2011, we moved from GP to Dynamics AX 2009. So I come to you to provide information today, not just from the consulting point of view of a project, but also a little bit about what it's like to be on the client side of one of these implementations. So those of you that have listened to all 3 sessions are aware that we kind of broke it into 3 topics, a what, a why, and a how. So the first session a couple weeks ago went over Dynamics 365 almost from an overview / demo point of view, going over the features and functionality of the product, specifically what is different in Dynamics 365 compared to what you may be experiencing with Dynamics GP. Last week's session was on the benefits of moving to the cloud and why Velocio thinks that may be a good move for many of our customers, particularly those that operate in the GP and 365 space. And now today we're going to talk about what an implementation would feel like and what the process would be to move a company from Dynamics GP and put them into the D365 finance and operations platform. All right, so just a little bit of housekeeping before we get into that. I want to make sure that everybody is on the same page as far as what the product is we're talking about, because Microsoft, to be fair, has created a little bit of confusion in the industry because they had multiple ERP products that all fell under the name of Dynamics 365. So there is one, the Business Edition, which is on the left side of the view here, is a simpler product, frankly. It is not designed to be handling heavy financial, customer service, retail, field, and operations features the way that the Enterprise Edition is. Microsoft is making some changes to that product. You may have heard the term Tenerife, or that it's getting what we call the full nav treatment. So that product will be advancing over the next couple years, but right now it's really not considered a viable product for companies that are, you know, close to or in the enterprise space. So the product we're going to talk about today is referred to Dynamics 365 for finance and operations. You'll also hear it called D365 for operations or D365 enterprise. That's all kind of talking about the same thing. And this product was built on the platform of functionality that came from Dynamics AX. So if you're familiar with kind of the former terms, there used to be GP, NAV, and AX. This product became AX in the cloud and has now morphed into Dynamics 365 for finance and operations. All right, so just to be clear on that, so the D365 Business Edition is and Project Madeira are kind of the same thing, and Tenerife is taking what was Madeira and giving it the capabilities that Nav has, and really creating a second product in the cloud that is supposed to launch later this year. So that's what you're seeing at the bottom of this roadmap. At the top of this roadmap, Dynamics AX became D365 Enterprise Edition Finance and Operations at the end of 2016, and that's the product that we're focusing on today. I'm going to skip these slides just in the interest of time. Okay, so one of the cool features about Dynamics 365 Enterprise is that you receive with that product the capabilities of the Common Data Service. So one of the compelling reasons to move to a cloud product is to have this integrated enterprise and be able to take data that is updated or stored in one feature of the business and be able to utilize it in other features of the business. So that includes really significant things like being able to take a quote in CRM and create the order inside of Dynamics, which, if those of you on the phone have done that, typically Scribe is a tool that we utilize for that. But using the Common Data Service, we're actually able to create more of those touch points utilizing the functionality provided by Microsoft. We don't necessarily have to bring in a third product anymore, and we don't necessarily have to be, telling the data to sync all the time. It's a much more intelligent feature. This is expanding rapidly from Microsoft, the types of things that we can do here. And really, this comes down to the end user level. For myself, I'm much more a functional person than a technical person, but it's really cool to be able to do something simple like create a tweet to thank a customer for their order is something that can be done through Flow, and you don't need to be a developer to do it, because I certainly don't qualify as one. So again, just being able to use your data across multiple platforms as the business needs is, in my opinion, a giant leap forward with what we can do with Dynamics 365. Okay, so last thing on the platform, and then we'll get into the specifics of what. So today I'm focused on what it would be like to move from GP to Dynamics 365 Finance and Operations. But I want to be clear that that is just one tenet of the Dynamics 365 portfolio that Microsoft offers. So with your licensing for Finance and Operations, you also get licensing for field service, for talent, for retail, for customer service and sales, aka CRM, and for other products like Flow, Power Apps, you can see them all listed here, that are licensed under the same umbrella as Finance and Operations. So yes, you can buy a Finance and Operations license as a standalone, but it's such minimal cost to buy the full license and be able to use all these features that it's a very worthwhile investment for our clients, and it's something we recommend. Later on in this webinar, I'll review the list price licensing, and you'll be able to see why we would recommend that you use the full product and not just get a Finance and Ops license. All right, so let me move to my next section here. Okay, so the first thing that is important to know when you're considering moving to Dynamics 365 and what a project in that product would be like is to make a decision about whether or not you're going to move to the cloud. So really, there's three different platforms that you can run Dynamics 365. You can be fully in the cloud. In other words, the entirety of the product is operating in the cloud. You can be fully on-premise, although there are some shortcomings to the on-premise product. There's features that aren't available on-premise that are available in the cloud. More about that in just a moment. And then finally, you can also use what Microsoft refers to as Edge, and I refer to as mostly cloudy. So what I mean by that is if you have critical business processes that you just can't risk knowing that your internet is up in order to be able to execute those business functions, you can still use a cloud instance of Dynamics 365 and have your critical business processes backed up on premise, and then they just sync up once the internet comes available. So let me give a valid example for that. If I owned a retail store, the last thing I would want is that I couldn't ring a customer up if my Wi-Fi was down in my store. I need to be able to ring customers up when my store is open, no matter what. So if I was a retail customer, I would likely choose the Edge option because I can have my retail functions backed up on premise and then just syncing up with my overall instance of Dynamics should I lose my internet connectivity. Other applications for Edge include things like hospitals and government, and manufacturing, where it's just either very expensive or even, adds risk to be fully shut down. So you will, as a customer, be able to choose, and Velocio can help make recommendations here about which platform would be the most appropriate for you all. Okay, so we will provide a copy of this deck, so you guys certainly don't need to screenshot or write this down, but this slide just provides some additional information about what is available for cloud, what is available for Edge, which is that kind of that hybrid version, and then local business data, it means on-premise, and that's the information that is provided there. Okay. So let's assume that you've gone ahead and made the decision that you're going to move to Dynamics 365, and for purposes of this slide, you've decided that you're going to be in the cloud. So what happens then? How do we start up a project? So the first thing to know is that when Velocio purchases your licensing, that is really the first step. The licenses need to be purchased in advance. There is a 20 user minimum to be on Dynamics 365 Enterprise or Finance and Operations, and that's full users, and in Dynamics it's named users. So I believe that GP still runs under a concurrent user model, which means if I had somebody working, say, morning shift and night shift, really I only need one license for them because they're logged in at different times. In Dynamics, because it's named user, that would be 2 licenses because I have 2 individuals accessing the system. Once the licenses are purchased, the next thing that would happen is we would provision an LCS environment. LCS stands for Lifecycle Services. And you can see here now that we would also configure that environment. LCS is kind of the launching point for where we will configure your environments, and also where we will create SharePoint, where we will store your test scripts, and you'll have access to data and code. It's kind of, if you will, it is a library of all of the information that's needed for your project. So launching your LCS environment is a pretty critical step. Once we've validated that we have access to your LCS environment, we'll go ahead and create the project, and that's where all of your implementation goodies and environments will live. We will build out the additional environments for you. One of us, either the client, the customer, or Velocio will go ahead and create your users. We will deploy a Visual Studio, and then we're finally ready to start configuring. So it takes, once you've made the decision and the purchase to move to Dynamics 365, it takes a few weeks to kind of get the ball rolling with these steps before we can actually jump into the configuration project. All right, if you're on premise, the process is slightly different. Obviously, we would want to get with you in regards to the size of the system and the hardware requirements to make sure that you had adequate equipment on site. Your licenses would be purchased. You would still have an LCS environment. It just would be used for slightly different purposes. We would still create the project. We would still create the environments, but obviously we're creating those in your servers and not in the cloud. And then all the other steps are essentially the same. We have to create the individual users and then deploy our Visual Studio and start configuration. All right, so you'll notice that I use the word environment and not environment, and that's because it takes several to actually bring one of these projects to fruition. So this is an example. This is typical, but not gospel. This does change a little bit from project to project, dependent upon the needs. I've seen as few as 3 environments on implementation projects, and I've heard of one project that had 9 different environments running. mostly based on how many different development environments were needed. But we will create we will create additional environments based on the purpose that they're used for during the implementation. So production, which is the last one down, that's pretty clear, right? That's going to be your live environment. And I think everybody understands Sandbox 3, which is a test environment. With Dynamics projects, we also create a few others. So we create what we call a clean, or you'll hear it referred to as gold, environment, which just holds configurations. There's no data in there. And that basically allows us that if something gets hosed during our testing and such, we can go back and just reload configurations directly from the configuration environment, and we don't have to restart the entirety of the project. The second one that's listed there is for development, and that's because obviously there's some trial and error when writing code, and we also don't want anything our developers are working on to interfere with other testing and activity we have going on. So it's typical for us to deploy one or more development environments for these projects. The one I mentioned earlier that had, I think, 9 different environments had several different development projects or environments. So each developer had their own environment to work in so that their code, as they were writing it, wasn't interfering with whatever anybody else would do. So you guys don't have to memorize these or anything like that. It's just information. But this will be an analysis that we provide to you all as a client as we're kind of planning out what this project would look like. For clarity, Microsoft provides 3 environments with their licensing, and so the 2 additional environments that you see here are an additional cost on the project, but once the implementation is stable, typically we can shut them down, so it's not a permanent cost, it's just, you know, during the implementation. Okay, so I mentioned Lifecycle Services, and I showed you part of it in the first session because if you remember, I went through a business process modeler where the screen was like interactively walking me through the steps to complete a transaction. And the source of that functionality is Lifecycle Services. But outside of being a functional user and the resources that it provides, Lifecycle Services is important for several other purposes related to the project. So you can see here that it does everything from estimating my license sizes for me. I can also run an upgrade analyzer. So in the future, when you all are looking to provide more functionality to the system, or if you're on premise and want to do a full upgrade, that upgrade analysis really runs through all of your code and makes sure that we understand the full scope of what that upgrade would look like. The customization analysis also runs through custom code to make sure that there's nothing in there that's going to interfere with other business processes. And anybody on the call who has, with great intentions, developed a process to do A, and then come to find out when you actually run the process, it's doing a little something else on the side that was unexpected, can appreciate having an analysis tool like that. And then, of course, you can also do things like issue search. All of your help desk and your diagnostics are held in Lifecycle Services as well. Okay, so another important factor of an implementation, especially moving from GP to 365, is what to do with your ISVs or your independent software VARs. So as you know, the Great Plains model is very ISV friendly, right? You can stick multiple ISVs into Dynamics GP, and most companies have to supplement the functionality that's available in the product. So Dynamics 365 has much more core functionality, and so the requirement of how many ISVs to use and under what platform is just significantly less. So one of the things that I'll ask that Lindsay send out at the conclusion of this call is that we can send you this list of ISVs that are common in the GP space, and then what utilization those have inside of Dynamics 365. So you can see here, for example, Data Masons is an EDI provider. EDI is not core functionality in Dynamics 365, so we would recommend that you keep data masons. On the other hand, if I come down here to, let's just pick one, Blue Moon, which can do some things around banking and then also around freight, you can see that all of that functionality is covered with D365 functions. So I won't painfully go through every ISV on this list, but I do want you guys to be aware that we will send this to you and that you can utilize it. And if you have any questions about how you're utilizing a given ISV, or if it's not on this list, certainly, bring those forward to Velocio and we can help answer those questions for you about how that functionality would be used. Okay, so the next important task to think about is data conversion. And we have several different tools at our disposal in order to bring your data over from Dynamics GP into Dynamics 365. So typically the data that we bring over will include all of your master records, so your customers, your vendors, your items, sometimes your chart of accounts, although it needs to be reformatted before it can come over. But those types of master records, and then we also bring over inventory balances. If it's worthy of data conversion rather than just manual entry, we'll bring over open purchase orders, sales orders, AP and AR, those types of things. So it really depends on the size of the company and if we can kind of turn those off. In GP, if you only have, say, 5 open purchase orders, then we would just manually enter them. If you have 5,000, then obviously we're going to do some data conversion there. So the scope of how much data gets converted or what type of data really depends on how many records you have. And then the platform that we use to bring it in just really depends on what will be the most friendly to the master tables inside of Dynamics. So it's common for us to use the Data Import-Export Framework, or otherwise referred to as DIXF. The easiest way to explain that is that we would provide you an Excel template. You'll load your data into the template, and then we load the template into Dynamics, and voila, your data is available. There are some rapid start tools that are available from Microsoft, although frankly, Velocio I wouldn't say that we frown on them, but we haven't had as much success as we would have liked. And so while Microsoft continues to promote them or provide them, our preferred method is really DIXF. And then also sometimes the data is being sourced from an outside system, right? So for example, if you have significant data in SalesPad, we may use an AIF to bring that in because that data can't be sourced directly out of GP. So again, this is an area where Velocio will work with you. We have experience moving companies from GP to 365, and we'll provide recommendations based on your specific data and needs to say what the best tools will be and how we'll go about doing that. Right. So this table just provides a list of the conversion tools and when they're appropriate to use. I should put an asterisk next to Microsoft because this is their opinion and not necessarily ours. Again, we will work with you guys to determine what we feel are the best tools and the best fit to move your data based on your individual companies. So what is the data conversion process and what does that feel like? So you can see here, assess, scrub, extract, load, test, and validate, and then production. So ELT is a common term in, in the data conversion space, extract, load, and test. But oftentimes assess is what we just talked about, right? So looking at your data to say what would be the best tool to move this data, and then also, how clean is your data? Is it in a state where it would be appropriate to bring it into Dynamics 365. So in other words, if your legacy system has items that have been obsolete and you haven't had inventory for 17 years, do we still want to bring that in? And kind of drawing those lines between what's appropriate to bring in and what's not. Once that is assessed, scrubbing the data would be that to remove duplicates, to make sure all the fields are filled out, to take away items that are obsolete and just don't need to be carried forward into the new system. Once that's complete, we do the extraction, load, and test. We actually do 2 sequences of that. So we'll do one kind of early on, and then we do one before user acceptance testing or final testing. And then the 3rd time would be for the go live process. So when we provide you a quote for data conversion, we're planning that we're going to extract the data twice from your system prior to go live, and then of course once as part of the go live process. So this is kind of boilerplate language from a Velocio implementation statement of work in regards to what the client's responsibilities are and what Velocio's responsibilities are. So you can see here that typically we have the client do the actual extraction from their source system and review the data and do the cleanup, and then we execute the loading, and then testing, of course, is a shared responsibility. Now with Dynamics GP, it's not uncommon for us to move this extract piece over under our area of responsibility, where we will actually extract the data, because we have so much specialized expertise at Velocio with Dynamics GP. That's something that we can bring some specialization and some efficiencies to. And a couple of clients recently have basically said, outside of their assessment of data that needed to be scrubbed, that they really did not want to, they didn't want to have any responsibilities as far as getting the data into the new system. And so they asked us to quote data conversion as a full service. So validation, looking back and forth from their source system to the new system, making sure that the data was complete, and then also the extraction all fell under our responsibility. So again, this is what you're seeing on the screen is what I would call a typical responsibility list, but this can be modified based on the needs of your company and what would be a best fit for you all. All right, another important consideration when you're moving from Dynamics GP to Dynamics 365 is what to do with your historic data. And so typically we bring in GL summary balances back to the beginning of the fiscal year. So if Jen Johnson's company runs on a calendar fiscal year, I would only have a few months of GL data coming in, because here we are the end of February. I would only have a few months of summary balances coming in as a standard. If we were going live in August, I would have 8 months of my GL summary balances. We do not typically bring in transactional historic data, so we don't typically bring in posted sales orders, posted purchases, posted inventory transactions into the new system. We choose not to do that because we just don't want to gum up your new system with old data and charge you, charge you to data convert legacy transactions. So we do have several options that we provide. So the first is that you can basically twilight GP, but have people be able to continue to access it to look at historic information. That is the lowest cost option, and but it's also the most painful one, because if you're on the phone with a customer, for example, you have to be able to look in Dynamics for recent transactions, and then you need to know to pull up GP for older transactions, and depending on your business, that could be quite painful. So there are other options that we can offer to accommodate that. We can move all of your data to SQL, so that instead of having to access GP, you can just query it in SQL, and you can write reports and normalize your data there, so that when you're looking at a customer order, it doesn't matter if it came from GP or 365, you can report on them under a combined structure. So that's an option. We can also, in addition to moving the data to SQL, we can also provide some integrated reports. So if you want us to build out reports that look at both legacy data and current data, obviously we can do that. And then if needed, we can build out a full data warehouse, aka a cube, and we can use different solutions for that, but we can do some pretty significant reporting depending on where we're pulling data from the data warehouse. And then there is a level 4 here. I should mention, I said we don't recommend and typically don't quote putting historic transactions directly into 365, but I do want to provide clarity that we can do it if we have to. So if for your business it's the only appropriate method to be able to look at things, to be able to look at historic transactions, they just must be in the new ERP system. We do carry the capabilities to move it, but typically we don't recommend that depending on, the customer's needs. So again, as we're going through project planning and looking at what an implementation for 365 would look like for your company, this is just a key decision about, what that project would be. All right, so I mentioned at the beginning of the webinar that I would talk about pricing a little bit, and here we are. And I want to qualify that this is Microsoft's list pricing with no discount. So this is public information. You can find it on the web if needed. But of course, because you all are current GP users and currently using Microsoft product, you would likely, can't guarantee, but you would likely be subject to some incentives above and beyond what this pricing is. So I'm going to walk through the list pricing, and then if you guys need, obviously specific pricing for your company, we would need to speak one-on-one about that. But what you're seeing up here, this 210 is $210 per month per user to have Dynamics 365 plan. And what does that mean? So Dynamics 365 plan is the entirety of that infinity circle that I showed you earlier. So it's finance and operations, it's D365 for talent, it's field service, it's CRM, it's Power Apps, it's BI, it's Flow, it's everything that is under the D365 umbrella. If the user needs absolutely everything, they would have the plan license, and again, that's $210 per month per user. Now, if the user does not need to have CRM or Power Apps or any of that other stuff that I just talked about, you can just purchase finance and operations. Those licenses are $190 per month per user. So you can see the reason that I think that it's logical that a company would look to have full plan licenses is because the features that we can deliver using the plan license, it's very affordable to jump from $190 to $210 per month to pick up on that additional functionality, especially if you're a Microsoft shop and you're utilizing customer experience or sales, aka CRM. That's a huge cost savings. So this customer engagement plan right here, this is what we all refer to as CRM. To be in the cloud, that's $115 a month per user just by itself. And so the companies that get the most bang for their buck, so to speak, are those that can combine the functionality of the Dynamics 365 portfolio and pick up on not just finance and operations, but also pick up on the CRM pieces, because those users are going to be paying very little really for their CRM functionality. Now, that license, the Unified Operations Plan license or the 365 Plan license, is like what I would refer to as a full user. So those are going to be your accountants and people that are doing transactional and strategic activity in the system. Now, there are other license activities that are available in Dynamics. So the first one here at the very bottom, the team member license, $8 a month. That's going to be people who just do like an occasional inventory inquiry, or warehouse workers that need to log in and post their time, production workers, things like that. They typically carry a team member license, and those are just $8 per month. An activities license is not a full user, but someone who has transactional permissions. So typically your customer service rep and your buyer will fall under an activity type license, and those are $50 per month per user. Those licenses do not count towards the 20 user minimum that I mentioned earlier. And then finally, your device license, that's for your cash registers and things of that nature under a retail umbrella. And those are 2 devices count as 1 full user. And so you do get some credit towards your 20 user minimum based on the number of devices that you have. Okay. And remember, as I mentioned earlier, Dynamics 365 is named users. So if you have 20 28 employees that will need to access the system in some way, then you will have 28 licenses for the system, even if those employees work different shifts and what have you. They may not all be full licenses based on what I described here, but you'll definitely have to carry a license for every user that accesses the system in some way. All right, so this just kind of gives another visual of everything that you get if you use the enterprise, that $210 per month license versus an operations license. So if you're moving to the cloud, and especially if you have CRM or you want to explore having CRM or D365 for customer service and sales, then we need to talk, because the amount of savings that you would have there is pretty significant. Or I would say, maybe instead of calling it savings, I should say that the additional spend would be quite small. Okay, so I know that, I'm being a little cute here, but really I just want to say that when you're considering the costs of Dynamics 365, don't make the mistake of just comparing the license costs. You also need to factor in your business process improvements that you'll get by moving to a product such as Dynamics 365. And then also, in GP, you can buy manufacturing as a pack. I think project is a pack. In D365, you get all the functionality. You don't have to buy it as different packs in any ways. You have to pay maintenance costs when you're on GP. With 365 in the cloud, there are no maintenance costs. It's just rolled into the pricing of your licenses. And again, and this was built with Azure in mind, so if you're on D365 in the cloud, you won't have server costs. You'll have very limited ISV costs. You won't have the costs of these big bang upgrades where you do an upgrade and then you're stable for, some years, 2-3 years, and then you have to go through another upgrade. The licensing with D365, you'll just have small, frequent changes to the system, so you won't have these ginormous upgrade experiences anymore. And then obviously the maintenance of your hardware and the staff to do that, you won't have to maintain that hardware anymore, and that staff will be able to work on other strategic initiatives beyond server maintenance. And then of course BI is included with Dynamics 365, so you wouldn't have those costs anymore either. So I will confess, I built this slide out just to be a little bit cute about it, but when you're doing your ROI or your return on investment to say, should we move to Dynamics 365, make sure to consider all of the cost factors that go into the product and not just do a license to license cost, because license to license, GP is much less expensive than 365. But when you start considering the efficiencies that you'll get from the product and removing all of these other cost barriers, it becomes much more in line, and your return on investment becomes more clear. All right, so when we're talking with companies, as we do, all the time, what do we look for companies that would be a good fit for Dynamics 365? And you're kind of seeing those expressed on the screen here. So we look for companies that have a diverse business practice. So if you're just posting, GL transactions and sales orders in GP and it's working great for you, then probably, depending on your volume, you would probably not be the first company we would look at to say they should clearly move to 365. If you're doing master planning, you have sales activity going on, you have a multi-company structure, things like that are kind of the points that we look at for companies to say we should be talking to them about Dynamics 365. And then also companies that are maybe a little technology forward. So obviously customer self-service has become a huge impactor to how we all shop, and as a result of that, it has become an impactor to how businesses need to operate, because customers don't expect to have to dial a customer service number anymore to check on the status of their order, right? They want to be able to log in and do it themselves. They want to receive updates about orders as they occur. So ERP has had to respond to that, and Dynamics is much more friendly to customer self-service, and through being able to build out things like mobile apps to be able to bring in pieces like that to our clients. And then companies that are looking or are already heavily utilizing ISVs we can at times be a cost savings by moving them onto 365, just getting them off from all of the ISVs and the interconnectivity they have going on there. So clearly it's not one size fits all. The discussion is very unique to every customer, but when Velocio is talking to clients, these are the types of things that we like to hear and see to be thinking that, hey, these guys would be a good fit for this product. So once we have a project going, so we've done our ROI, it's a good fit. We analyzed what ISVs we can get, that we can move away from because we're going to use 365 functionality. We decided, how we're going to be in the cloud. We decided, what we're going to do for data conversion and historic data. So we give you guys a proposal to say this is what we're going to do. These are the business processes. You say this is a beautiful proposal. You sign it the same day, and we launch into our project. Right? That's how it works in my mind. But really, what I wanted to give you here is what I would call a typical implementation. Now, this is risky to present this because, to be honest, the shortest implementation I worked on was 3 months. The longest one that I worked on is 3 years. So I'm going to use typical in gigantic air quotes because it really does depend. But with Velocio, what you would experience is a couple months of analysis up front to define your requirements, to do your fit gap, to build out your sprint cycles. And I'll describe sprint cycles in just a moment, but really to analyze all your business processes and get our collective acts together around what we need to do and how we need to do it. And then in this slide, it shows starting in November, we do the execution phase. So if on the phone, if you're familiar with waterfall versus agile projects, Velocio uses a hybrid model where it's not fully waterfall and it's not fully agile. So specifically, we will do our analysis up front of the entirety of the project. And then during the execution, the design, build, and test, we'll break those business processes out. So maybe in sprint 1, we're focused on general ledger chart of accounts, purchase orders, and inventory transfers. And then in sprint 2, we may be focused on sales order activity, general ledger transactions, and master planning. But we'll take each business process that is included in your project and assign them to a sprint. One of the reasons that we like this, and we like it for our clients and have received positive feedback, is it helps to load level the client's activity during the project. So instead of calling you guys into a room for 3 weeks and saying, okay, we need to design this whole thing out, instead our design sessions will be a couple hours long on each business process. Testing will be a couple hours long, and so you're in a much better position to load level your resources to work with us throughout the entirety of the sprints. Once those sprints are complete, in other words, we have all the business processes built out, we want to make sure that they fit together well, right? Like put the puzzle together, make sure that our end-to-end processes work as expected. So that's listed here under the deploy phase. So we'll do our user acceptance testing, training, our cutover planning, and then once we go live, we will continue to provide you support as needed, and support is included in our statement of work. And then typically we also provide support for the first month end, regardless of when the project goes live. The first month end, we step back in and assist with that. All right, so things to consider in an implementation are what type of approach you'll use. Again, we like to use kind of a hybrid between a waterfall and an agile implementation. When I say phase there, what that means is that we bring up different functionality at different times. So maybe for your company, obviously you need your general ledger, AP and AR and sales, purchasing, but fixed assets and budgeting, you're kind of doing those in Excel right now, so you want to move them to 365, but we don't have to necessarily have that on day one. So that would be an example of a phased implementation when we bring up your critical processes, you're live on Dynamics 365, and then at a later date, we pull in fixed assets, budgeting, and other processes, maybe workflow, that you want to have in 365, but we didn't need to have on day one. Consider the overall time frame. Obviously, how we phase can be dependent upon time frame. Consider change management too. So if your employees have been working in Dynamics 365, or excuse me, in Dynamics GP for the last 15 years and aren't familiar with other products, that's a very different project than a company that, you know, has just brought in people that already have experience with Dynamics or have worked with other products like SAP and Oracle over the years and are more aware, if you will, of the ways that different ERPs function. So there's no right or wrong answer there, but just be aware of the culture of your company and what an ERP change would mean to them so that we can collectively plan appropriately for that throughout the project. Also consider your skill set. So particularly when I was talking about data conversion earlier, and we can move responsibilities between what you would do as a client and what we would do as a partner, but let's make sure that we haven't moved those into a bucket that can't complete those tasks. Also for things like report development, we're more than happy to have you guys develop your own reports and even train you on how to do that. But if you don't have the resources available to do it, then please don't take it as a responsibility and then, you know, a few days before go live say, oh, we don't have these reports because we weren't sure how to build them, and you know, now our project is code red. So just consider your skill sets and the capabilities that your team has as we plan out a project, and then obviously consider cost. So in my example earlier, you know, moving fixed assets and budgeting out of Excel and into Dynamics is a fantastic idea. But if we simply don't have the budget to do it, then we don't have the budget to do it, and maybe it would need to wait. So we will work with you guys as you're planning out what your project would look like and understand your time frame and your cost, skill set, and work to plan a project that's going to be beneficial to your organization. All right, so a common next step to take is to start doing an ROI, or return on investment analysis, to say, is this a good idea for our company? And certainly this is something that Velocio can help with, but if it's something you want to do independently, then I just recommend that you consider these points that I have bulleted here as part of what you include in your ROI analysis, again, above and beyond what I stated with the licensing and what's included or excluded. Just be thinking about the amount of time that you can save by, you know, not having to train people on multiple ISVs and moving towards more of a paperless process, or getting your workflow to be in the system, or you know, being able to utilize things like transportation management. Those are not small things, and we can find a lot of spots where it really is beneficial to move on to this platform for our clients. So if you need our help with an ROI, we're certainly willing to assist with that. If you want to develop one independently, these are the things that you want to start thinking about. All right, so what do I suggest to people that have participated in these sessions and how to move forward from here? So the first one is to have open communication with Velocio. So if you're just kicking the tires and curious about the product, I'm fine with that. You know, this can be just education. If you're thinking that maybe you want to make this move immediately, or in, you know, in the next 6 months or in the next 2 years, just share that information with Velocio. We can help you plan for your project, and just being aware that this is a product that you have interest in will help guide our recommendations that we'll make to you on other areas, like would it make sense to continue your upgrade of GP if you're looking to move to 365 in, I don't know, say 2020. Just being open so that we can have, you know, good conversations about that stuff is something that I would recommend. I do recommend drafting your ROI, because moving to this product is not a small venture for any company. So being able to understand the why and what will be in it for your company is tremendously important, both to get your internal investment and people on board internally, but also to get your investment approved by your leadership team. I would continue to just build internal excitement via webinars and product overviews. Inside Velocio and outside of Velocio, there's a lot of content available online related to Dynamics 365. Continue to look for that and keep people aware of, you know, how this product can work for them. And then finally, you know, start planning out your project with Velocio. So obviously, if you're thinking that in 10 years you may move, it's probably a little premature to work on a project plan. But I can share that we're working with companies right now that aren't planning to actually execute their project until 2020. So it's not too soon to just get awareness and get started and to just start thinking through some of these features of the product, and I would certainly recommend that. All right, so I talked earlier about the differences of clouds, so we're good there. And yeah, and I think, honestly, I think that's probably the conclusion of the prepared content that I had. So Lindsay, if you want to take everybody off mute, and if there's any questions, I'll go ahead and answer those now.
Sure. There's no questions right now. Again, if you have them, you can put them in the question box or raise your hand and I can definitely unmute you if you have those questions. But definitely, if something comes up, feel free to reach out to Jen at jjohnson@velocio.com, and we will definitely send out this presentation along with the other documents that Jen mentioned. So we'll stay on here for another minute or so, but again, thanks everyone for joining us today, and just reach out if you have any questions.
All right, it sounds like we're good, Lindsay. I appreciate your time today and look forward to working with everybody on this product.
Great, thanks. Bye.
All right, take care. Bye.